nascent capability was still a spark in our head more than anything else. But they've taken it to heart and they use some of those Copilot capabilities that we provide out of the box, if you will, from a level of effort. There's capabilities that you can start to take advantage of today, tomorrow, within the coming week to start improving processes. And that level of effort moves along a chain to creating a custom Copilot.
Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world, with your host, Peggy Smedley.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. America's supply chain is stretched thin. Rising costs, global shocks, and fragmented logistics have exposed a hard truth. We're not as self-sufficient as we thought, or perhaps we might have hoped. For years, we outsourced resilience. My next guest and I will look at the numbers that say now 75% of logistics leaders admit they have lagged on digital transformation and innovation. Meanwhile, 91% of customers demand seamless end-to-end service from one provider. With this in mind, will AI agents be the turning point? It's not just streamlining operations, it's helping us rebuild control, visibility, and domestic strength. Today, we tackle if we can reclaim the supply chain and our own future. Please join me in welcoming David Esposito, Industry Advisor for Logistics, Transportation, and Supply Chain at Microsoft Manufacturing and Mobility. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peggy. Great to meet you. And this is a big topic, as you just surmised there.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here today, David. And I thought before we start this conversation and looking at this big picture, that we can talk really about so much. There's customers, there's the challenges. So let's start off and begin by discussing how technology, and you and I have talked before we even got onto the show this morning, helps freight to foresight. We know this is a big one. I really think we need to dig deeper in how we can leverage maybe AI agents overall, helping manufacturers, the industry overall, do a better job at, let's look at, let's say, contingency planning or even supplier diversification, because way better than I, that this is a really big topic right now.
I like that approach, and so much it'll allow us to take a bite out of some of the issues facing the logistics, transportation, supply chain, risk management across the board. Since the pandemic, it's been really nothing but disruption in this industry. There's an overcapacity, there's oversupply at this point in time, especially from freight logistics, as well as the tariff uncertainties and everything else going on here. But looking specifically at how we can address this from an AI agent perspective, we can really look at how some of this technology from freight to foresight might provide some of the answers we need. Now, I would never put forth a technology strategy as being the end-all be-all, but if we combine that with the process and the people, I think we have a great story to tell here. Number one I would put at the list is proactive contingency planning. AI agents introduce autonomous, goal-driven capabilities that continuously monitor and optimize supply chain 24/7. Is what we're talking about here. The other big thing I would put forth here from a technology perspective is scenario modeling and risk simulation. We tend to think of modeling and simulation as purely an engineering capability. However, we can do that in our day-to-day planning across the board when it comes to supply chain resiliency. AI agents can run what-if simulations across multiple disruption scenarios, whether it be natural disasters, geopolitical risks, demand spikes, helping manufacturers predefine mitigation strategies. There really is a number of capabilities that we could be looking at here. The other big thing here is the predictive and prescriptive planning. By leveraging real-time signals and predictive analytics, agents anticipate some of these demand shifts and supply risk, giving you a heads up, right? Enabling agile adjustments before the disruptions actually occur, potentially in a lot of cases, and also preparing you for future disruptions. So that forecasting and integrated business planning really leads to a synchronized decisions made across finance and operations. The other thing I would say here is also automated safety, stock, and inventory optimization. That's another big area where these new capabilities can be applied to dynamically tune the safety of our stock levels and reorder points, reducing excess inventory while maintaining the current service level or even improving it.
Those are interesting things. When you look at those 4 or 5 different areas that you talked, they're almost kind of like pillars to success if you think about that they need to have. But if we think about this right now, everybody's on edge. And I don't want to set aside the discussion on tariffs, because even though I know that's on top of mind of listeners, I think companies have to reposition their operations. If they take into account what you just said, contingency planning, they take into account all of these things and be more proactive instead of reactive. How are companies repositioning, looking at what you just said, their operations, and looking at technology to reconsider this idea of reshoring? Because we were offshoring everything. So now they've got all this fragmented sourcing, and all of this, while the mighty question is how all of this is the control, and is it worth it? All of these upfront costs. You just said the risk. And I wonder if this is something that they have to look at right now, saying, what is it? Because you just said, what do I do? How much of this do I have to look in making sure I'm making the right decisions? This is a big challenge right now that they have to think about the fragility, I think, of the community, of where they're going to avoid all the giant risk of this, because it sounds like it's a shift in the way that they think about the supply chain, what they've done in the past several years, and reshoring versus offshoring. There's a mighty amount of risk in all of this and costs.
Yeah, indeed. And it challenges some of the lean first assumptions we've made over the past couple of decades.
Exactly.
From that perspective, if I could drill in maybe a little bit on supplier diversification, the way this technology might be applied is from an AI agent could help manufacturers build a more resilient supplier network by just thinking out loud here, supplier risk scoring and monitoring. Right? From that perspective, again, that 24/7 capability that's keeping an eye out for your risks and specific to your industry. Not to mention the geopolitical exposure. There's climate change. Obviously, there's a ton of things here that could flag vulnerabilities early. On top of that, you can't just keep an eye on it. You have to look at the dynamic sourcing recommendations. Agents can provide that capability as well, in addition to your expertise in-house, right? And certainly AI and agents, as we like to call it here at Microsoft, from a co-pilot perspective, can help them ascertain what the true risks are. I think another big area here is the collaborative supplier management. Intelligent agents can streamline the communications, the contact management, dispute resolution, reducing friction, and improving agility across the board. So these are all like tangible examples that we can use right now with the technology as it stands today, with an ever increasing efficacy as we move forward.
So as we start doing this, these shifts, are we creating this giant ripple effect on downstream logistics and production schedules long term? Because as I see this, as you start talking about this, I think the interesting thing is the shift, because contractually, I think you're talking about and how dependencies are going to have to change. But I think the bigger one is the trust in AI agents now. You just said, because it's got to be human with AI agents. So you can't just rely on AI agents alone. So you have to know that whatever these contractual relationships are going to ultimately change, and you have to know that you're making the right ones. So there's this trust factor has got to be strong, and you have to know that the schedules and productions are working, or we're going to go back to the toilet paper problem and we have giant shortages. Is there something there that we're going to know that our manufacturers are going to have to make sure they insulate themselves properly to avoid the risk? I know I'm throwing multiple questions at you, but I think
this is good.
When I hear you talk, it makes us think that these supply chains have to be more resilient using AI in the proper way, but not just a tool by itself, but humans working with the AI agents together to know that we're doing it properly and that we're doing it in the proper way going forward.
We've always put forth here at Microsoft that there needs to be a human in the loop in the process. Not just for making sure that we're addressing the problem correctly and with information that is necessary in order for us to achieve our objectives, but just from that perspective, we look at it as an additive capability that makes us smarter, that increases our awareness, et cetera, et cetera. And you mentioned a little bit here about some of the upfront costs. of implementing this technology. And we know there is a cost associated with this, of course. What I'm seeing from a lot of logistics, transportation, supply chain in general, there's a lot of efforts underway in terms of applying the latest advancements in artificial intelligence directly to problems that they are facing. Really, I think that's a good way to focus your efforts. And if we're talking in terms of whether or not a company should invest in R&D, whatever the case may be, to address situations, this largely depends on their business model and whether or not they see the cost as accruing any benefit. To drill in a little bit more, it's going to be different for a first-party logistics than it would be a third or fourth-party logistics concern. These are just some of the host of considerations. And I'm also seeing across the industry, there's this fear of missing out. Right? Folks are rushing to the table and looking for ways they can apply this technology in a way that's meaningful to their business, but they also should make sure that they take a measured approach, and that would be identifying your problem statements as well as leading to specific scenarios within your industry that are going to result in business outcomes.
So those business outcomes are going to change. So what we used to do and try to say who our partners will dramatically change. We won't be able to keep the same partners anymore.
Yes.
And for that very reason, will the types of inventories we have change? So then our risks change, our costs change. Is that the kind of mindset that companies need to understand as well? I understand when we say we're offshoring, we're onshoring, and we understand our partners change. But do companies need to understand when they're looking at this, they strategically have to start thinking about this as they start looking at the schedule, the planning, all of that in the supply chain, just what you said, in logistics, transportation, the supply chain, and all of that has to come into effect. And maybe sometimes when they're looking at this is a much larger kind of back when we looked at just-in-time planning versus inventory buffers, all of those things that we got rid of, now we're going back to in some ways again. And I feel like these are the kind of things you almost have to peel back the onion to really look at the supply chain thoroughly, to how you're reevaluating and how you use AI to help you solve some of these problems.
Yeah, I love the way you referred to just-in-time manufacturing because it gets to the heart of what we're talking about to some degree, right? I think there is a possibility here where that would play in terms of the playbook that we would initiate to address these issues, but it has to be a different approach than the lean era mindset, in my opinion, and the opinions of many others. What supplier fragility reveals is that there's an overconcentration of risk, right? Decades of cost-driven consolidation have left many supply chains dependent on a handful of suppliers, restating what you just said there. When one fails, we talked about the First Brands bankruptcy the other day. The ripple effect is immediate and severe, right? From a systematic vulnerability standpoint, modern supply chains optimized for efficiency often lack that redundancy, right? And there's a good study out there in defense of redundancy, the overconcentrated modern economy and the dangers it poses, that was put out by MIT last year. And we can certainly include a link to that study, which I think everyone should read that's in this business if they haven't already. The other big thing here is if we address the question of why internal resiliency matters, restating what I said earlier, visibility alone isn't enough. Companies need risk quantification and predictive analytics to prioritize mitigation strategies. And there's the Swiss cheese effect, as they referred to it. Failures slip through multiple layers, organizational, technical, procedure, when resiliency isn't embedded from the outset. So designing resiliency by default is essential in terms of implementing just-in-time.
David, can we step back for a second? You mentioned First Brands, and I'd love for you to talk about them as an automotive supplier, and maybe if you can dig a little deeper in kind of the bankruptcy and their capabilities and mitigations for our listeners so they can understand a little bit as you were talking about that.
Sure. As we all know, disruption in the automotive and manufacturing space is hitting multiple points within the value chain, from tier one suppliers to OEMs, and is being amplified by some of the new market dynamics that we're seeing. From a supplier fragility and tier one exposure perspective, again, in the case of First Brands, we're looking at bankruptcies and sudden failures, where it's forcing OEMs to scramble to find replacements, making suboptimal sourcing decisions under pressure. This highlights the vulnerability of over-reliance on a single supplier. That multi-tier risk visibility from whether it be an agentic AI capability or just monitoring, using some of these co-pilot capabilities to monitor the market on a regular basis and provide you that research report on a regular basis as well, is going to help automotive OEMs adopt to new capabilities and new platforms, gain visibility across tier 1 and 2 and 3 suppliers. These tools that we can put together from this perspective is an assistive capability that will provide early alerts on disruptions and reduce premium freight costs, insurance rates, including cost of the parts themselves, while cutting inventory buffers potentially by up to 10 to 15%. From a marketplace perspective, we're seeing it across the board. I can bring up platforms such as Uber Freight, which are eroding traditional OEM control by directly connecting suppliers with end customers, bypassing legacy leasing and logistics structures. There's other companies across the board from the 3PL and 4PL space like DHL, which are producing electric vehicles in collaboration with tier 1 suppliers. Some of our partners, such as Bosch, challenging OEM dominance and reshaping the ecosystem. And on top of that, these technologies shifts are also structural shifts. From the electrification and software-defined vehicle space, is there a whole new set of tier 1 suppliers that the OEMs need to be aware of? And some manufacturers are also exploring vertical integration to reduce dependency risk. Though this approach is costly and complex, we're seeing that at Tesla, right? And not everyone's going to have the budget to produce their own parts, so to speak.
So when I look at this right now, we have to see companies that are successfully doing it and companies that are going to struggle, and we're going to see failures. We're going to see companies
Indeed.
that are going to disappear. Are you seeing, and so let's talk about that. Are you seeing partners or companies that are starting to move forward and saying, we're making that transition, that we're starting to have proper control of what we're doing, but they're doing it very strategically. They're not leapfrogging anyone else, but they're saying, look, we're creatively accelerating how we're doing it, and we're taking partners along with us who understand what we have to do, or we're just going to do it all ourselves. Is it one or the other? Or I guess I'm trying to understand how this transition works, because I don't know that you could just do it all overnight. It's got to take some shifting.
Yeah, and having that measured approach and defining, dare I say it, a roadmap to help address some of these issues is important. If we look at what some companies are doing, we have a number of customer successes in this space. We can talk a bit about Dow and how they're addressing this cost control and creative acceleration problem, as you state. Cost control through AI and automation is another key area. Dow spends billions annually on global shipping to tackle invoicing errors, freight cost discrepancies. They deployed our capabilities from a co-pilot standpoint, as well as custom AI agents, autonomous agents, which review, to get down to the nitty-gritty here, reviews invoice data for anomalies, right? So it's an anomaly detection capability there, mismatched rates, duplicate invoices, having an interactive agent where not only employees, but maybe even the customers themselves can query to act on an invoice data using natural language, right? Some of the impacts we're seeing here is within weeks, they were able to flag thousands of errors and anticipate millions in freight savings in the first year, right? So these are measured approaches that you can take, which also help propel the need for this capability in the industry by showing immediate success. Right? It's going to be hard to keep funding if you're caught in what we refer to in the technical space here, POC hell, right? Where you're constantly just looking at new ways of applying without actually implementing to reduce the risk, achieve the outcomes, etc. Hopefully that it sort of addresses some of the issues. Another area where, from a supply chain efficiency, Dow automated freight invoice analysis across 4,000 daily shipments, freeing teams from manually editing and enabling focus on strategic work. So there's, aside from the human in the loop area where we like to focus, it's all about freeing up your talent within your organization to do other things besides the administrative work that would normally hunker them down for hours, if not days.
When you look at You're talking about Dow, how they did this, and look at finding errors in invoicing and things like that. When you talk about those costs are very visible. People can
Mhm.
see, companies see that, and they see the savings. And where the human makes an error and they say, we wouldn't have caught that right away. And that's a lot of money. That immediately goes to the bottom line. Company can see the value. Things like that make a difference. That's where you say, let's start with that proof of concept right away. So you could say, there's something we could see right away. They can understand it. Are those the way that companies can say, this is how we make that transition? That gives us a way of saying we could see the results. Are these the other ways now when somebody says we want to take the journey, there's something we could see, it's visible? Are there others like that see the visibility, that are improving, like you're saying, that are seeing what's happening in the supply chain, and they say, we are making the moves right now, and it's changing our bottom line, and not in just a few thousand, we're talking hundreds of thousands, and that makes the difference?
Indeed. I like to use a word, and I'm sure it's out there with other folks, but it's all about creative acceleration, right? Reimagining processes with these new capabilities. From Microsoft perspective, it's our Copilot, our Azure AI Foundry, which supports 1,100 models that people compare and contrast to see what makes the most sense for applying to a business problem. And in the case of Dow, they are leveraging that Copilot Studio and Azure AI Foundry multi-agent to create multi-agent systems that handle complex workflows, such as what we just talked about, the real-time invoice validation and supplier collaboration. The way this creative acceleration works is it reduces the repetitive tasks, but also enables employees to interact with enterprise data conversationally. This is so important, right? You no longer need to know the secret incantation in Python or be a coder in order to extract all this information from your data. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Everybody I talk to in this business is swimming in data, but they don't have a lot of information. So they're not able to aggregate this data, pull it together, and use it in a meaningful context. This is where AI agents can really help in terms of providing that capability.
That's a powerful statement. Swimming in data, but don't have the information. That's really, did I say that right? That's really powerful to understand that. If you think about what do you do with it? That's
Exactly. And that's it in a nutshell. If we just concentrate on that, I think you're on the road to really achieving some of the objectives that you've set for you and your organization.
Talk a little bit about how AI-driven tools are helping supply chain and logistics teams like C.H. Robinson, because they're working together, I think you talked about, to reduce operational bottlenecks. And I think you talked to me before we got on air to improving freight visibility and a whole bunch of other things. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, C.H. Robinson has done a wonderful job and they're an early adopter as well. I've had conversations with them going back 2 years when this nascent capability was still a spark in our head more than anything else. But they've taken it to heart and they used some of those Copilot capabilities that we provide out of the box, if you will, from a level of effort. There's capabilities that you can start to take advantage of today, tomorrow, within the coming week to start improving processes. And that level of effort moves along a chain to creating a custom Copilot. So you may use, as in the case of C.H. Robinson, Copilot within Outlook to better support the intake process, the order intake process, and go from hours of work to realizing the fulfillment and the revenue to just minutes, right? And making sure that the workflows are automated from that incoming email. That you could take advantage of today. Right? But you may want to go a little bit deeper and start to use some of our more customizable Copilot agents, as well as creating new agentic capabilities within Azure AI Foundry, utilizing specific models to address even bigger problems. And again, getting back to that scenario modeling and trade-off analysis, that's a good way to start and making sure that you're identifying the capabilities you want to bring to your business.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, David, what we're looking at is we're starting to see AI-driven tools, and just these two cases that you shared with us help the supply chain team spot issues faster. If we look at the streamlining production reviews, and maybe even in that case, as we start looking, it helps reallocate maybe in some cases to more efficient or effort to achieve higher value work if they look at it as
Mhm.
time goes on? And all in all, are we getting greater efficiency and less waste? That's what I'm hearing you say. But is that what's coming out of the things that we're seeing right now? But when I hear you talk, that's what I hear. But is that really what's happening?
Yes, that is what's happening, but not every organization has fully embraced the processes leading to those objectives. So, in the case of, let's take real-time visibility and orchestration, that's going to help, that's going to be an input. If you have that end-to-end monitoring in place, AI agents to track shipments, warehouse operations, inventory in near real time, right? Flagging anomalies, triggering corrective actions automatically. That obviously is going to make you smarter in how you apply this technology. And having some type of risk quantification and prescriptive actions and the ability to further attenuate that is going to make resilience actionable. And from a supplier collaboration, streamlining communications, like we just talked about, manage contracts, resolve disputes autonomously, reducing delays and compliance risks, and then getting to the heart of your question, automation and efficiency. We can reduce a lot of manual bottlenecks with this technology. And that applies to technology in general, making sure that you have access to the data that you're capturing, getting back to the awash in data, but not information. We need to be able to utilize this new capability to not only automate repetitive tasks like procurement approvals, freight invoice checks, and compliance audits, but this also frees up your team to make more of that strategic decision across the organization. So it results in faster cycle times and lower operational costs without sacrificing control.
So from the bigger picture, are we seeing then, it sounds like a catch-22. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the more I hear you, the more overwhelmed I am for the industry, because it sounds like we're seeing more pressure on freight life cycle efficiency, employee workload, and customer experience overall.
That's a good question. I would tackle it from addressing it from the strategic imperative that you may have. AI agents can transform supply chains from reactive networks to adaptive ecosystems. If we look at that statement alone, without getting into the absolute prescriptive way you're going to address that, it's going to be different for every business depending on where you are in that ecosystem.
But does it depend on that the companies right now, if they're not paying close attention, they're losing a lot of money. They're leaving a lot of wasted money on the table because they're not paying enough attention, and potentially they could be out of business because they're not paying attention. That's what you're saying. You're giving a great interview here. But on the other hand, if they are paying attention, they could be highly efficient and highly profitable and really going to that next level, automating to the best of their abilities and really doing it well.
Yes, and in that case, they can predict these disruptions before they occur in some cases, using that predictive capability that we were talking about. But they can take it a step further and automate the mitigation actions, perhaps, right? And that is available from linking these agents together across a workflow. That's going to take a little time to identify, look at the processes that you have in place now, right? Because that's a great starting point, and see where you can insert these automation capabilities. And that allows you to scale the resilience also without the proportional cost increases that you might have to in a traditional mitigation that would involve hiring a lot more people, breaking up the process into piecemeal capabilities. A lot of that can be handled by the agentic process.
That agentic process you described with not being able to be a coder before, but now having the experience to be able to see things you couldn't do before, you didn't know how to do it, you could future-proof a lot of things that before you didn't even know you could, if I'm understanding in some ways.
That is a much better way of stating it, in a simpler way. Yes, I agree with your statement there.
So seeing it that way, what advice would you give listeners then to future-proof their supply chains from planning through delivery and avoid expensive disruptions down the line? Because that's what we're talking about, right? That's what's been so powerful about our conversation today.
Yeah, again, depending on the categorization of where you see the application being most opportunistic and efficacious, right? From a freight cost control, let's just zero in on that. That autonomous invoice auditing is a great capability to look at, flagging errors before payment, right? That from a dynamic freight optimization, perspective, this is more going to be on the operations side. Agents can orchestrate logistics to optimize route planning, carrier selection, load balancing in near real time, reducing delays and cost overruns. From an intermodal standpoint, that might mean deciding whether something gets shipped air versus surface transportation, as a specific example. These types of capabilities are spot decisions that could be made, again, in near real time, rather than having to do it in a network plan that's going to be unchangeable for the next 2-3 months of your life cycle.
Based on that, each company has to look by size, by where they're envisioning this. But the opportunities, if they slice and dice it, when we look at it through planning, through delivery, what we just said, we always say you can't bite the whole elephant, or
Exactly.
and when you do this, you're really looking at things to where we said we've got all these tariffs, we don't want to address that. But right now, you can really take this and really do things that really make an organization competitive, makes an organization profitable, but makes an organization future-proof, is what we're talking about. And you just gave a few customers that are doing this, that are seeing success with it. Through all of this, it's changing the dynamic. Are there some real steps, being proactive, planning, scenario? Are those all kind of key things that'll help, using AI agents that'll help if you slice and dice it, instead of trying to feel like you got to do it all? But if you take these kind of prescriptive ways of doing it, it's manageable with the people you have without saying, I've got to throw the baby out with the bathwater in order to accomplish this.
That's an interesting question. And again, we're biting off a large portion here. One of the things that I've removed from my conversation points with all of my customers is using the word future-proof. I cannot in any way future-proof any organization, nor can anyone, really. What we can be is future-ready, right? I think from that perspective, the strategic advantages that scenario analysis for risk mitigation, as an example, where AI agents can simulate cost risk trade-offs for different logistics supply chain strategies you may have, enabling manufacturers to make informed decisions under the incredible amount of uncertainty that we face now. And why it matters is traditional logistics systems are currently fragmented and reactive, right? Leading to costly overruns and inefficiencies. We should start applying right away the agentic AI agents, co-pilot capabilities, this large language model and generative pre-trained transformer GPT technologies to turn these into self-optimizing ecosystems. Because that's at the end of the day, what they provide, right? What that can deliver in terms of true ROI is lower operational expenses, faster cycle times, and let's not leave improved customer satisfaction off the list here, right? At the end of the day, if you're delighting your customers, that only improves your business.
David, I love that. We have to think about improving our customers, but I love future ready. I will remember that because that is so valuable. I think that sets the stage. So David Esposito, industry advisor, and I love that you are part of the logistic transportation supply chain for manufacturing mobility. I'm going to ask you this as we wrap up here. Any next actions you would suggest our listeners take? Because this has been a really wonderful conversation, and I think it's great that our listeners have something that take away based on all. We've talked a lot of different things here, but what would you advise them from here as we wrap it up?
Aside from the recommendations that we just discussed and just provided, which really can be summed up as staying in the know on where this AI agentic generative pre-trained transformer contextual understanding leading to better analytics and automation through natural language interrogation. All of these things are a good way to stay on top of what is available, as well as provide a trajectory or that, again, that future ready capability where you and your organization could take advantage of these capabilities that we as hyperscalers are providing to the market. I would suggest making decisions on who it is you would like to align, whether that be with the hyperscalers, the ISVs out there that are building. We have a number of partners that are building supply chain and logistics and transportation capabilities on the Azure platform. So finding the right ISV to associate yourself with, and as well as if you need extra help from a service integrator, from an SI standpoint, making sure that you have someone that's in the know in this context. And we also have a number of SIs that we work with in this space as well. We have a number of blogs as well as tons of literature and case studies across our web presence here at Microsoft. I would suggest maybe even using your Copilot capabilities to go out and interrogate some of these sources to find what really is needed by your organization. And in some cases, as in the case of Microsoft 365 Copilot, we have a researcher agent that's pre-built that you can get daily reports, weekly reports on staying abreast of the industry changes, etc. In this case, we're not only keeping an eye on what might be useful to our business, but we're using these very same technologies to help us stay abreast and apply it correctly to our business.
David, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Okay, listeners, that's all the time we have for this segment. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X at Connected World, or follow me on LinkedIn to continue the conversation there. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com, our show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this commercial break. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.